format of tonight's meeting is to have a guest speaker share their experience, strength and hope on how Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery is working in their lives for 15 to 20 minutes. Tonight we have the wonderful Leo to share.
Hi everyone, my name is Leo and I'm an alcoholic. And it's good to be here and it's good to be sober. My story is perhaps like anyone else's really, in that I got to Alcoholics Anonymous just over 17 years ago now because I couldn't stop drinking. It was a terrible, simple truth that I just couldn't stop drinking. And you know, I guess my story is just that. It's just a story. But just to identify, I drank for only 12 years, which I guess is not terribly long in the scheme of things. I didn't drink until I was 21 because I was a very good Catholic boy from the west of Ireland, and I had a confirmation pledge, which I kept. So that was the first of life's miracles, I suppose, really. But I started drinking at my 21st birthday, roughly, and then as time went on, I found I couldn't drink at all without getting drunk. And it was as simple as that. There was sort of progression in my drinking that was not noticeable at the time, but as I look back on it, it was just a steady progression, drinking more for less effect, and drinking as often as possible. Now, as part of my story, I often share that my background was that I didn't have a lot of access to alcohol at that stage, because when I was about 19, I joined a monastery where I was to remain for 21 years until I was 40. And so I did an awful lot of study there and an awful lot of prayers and an awful lot of other stuff like that, which was really very good and was a very good life. But at the same time, I was an alcoholic. So whatever religion was there didn't keep me sober. So the God that I sort of needed, I couldn't find there somehow. And that's not to say anything about the God that was there, it just didn't work for me. But you know, and I left, I should say, these days in good stead and with no record of any kind. But the problem, I think, was I was an alcoholic and my drinking progressed. And from being someone who was very sheltered and very quiet, I think, I never expected to become an alcoholic. I never thought that would happen to me. And yet, I found that every time I drank, I got drunk. And I began to become wilder and wilder. And when I say wild, I wasn't terribly wild. I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? But you know, given the circumstances that I found myself in, it was quite wild. As an example, I was in charge of a house in a certain area of Ireland, which I won't mention in case you're there. But I came out of a blackout dancing in a nightclub with this American woman and chatting very animatedly about 3 a.m. I had no idea how I got there, but I was feeling I was a really good dancer and it was all happening. And I was telling her how I was the superior in the local friary, which was also true. But so there was that sort of combination of honesty and madness all in the one sort of conversation. And I remember that those sort of things would happen to me. You know, I mean that's peculiar for a number of reasons, which I may come back to. But there was just such madness in my life when I drank, and as time went on, I couldn't guarantee my behaviour, of course, and all of the things that you hear in here. I drank so much, and I drank more than everyone else around me. So I sought the company of people who could drink like I drink, some of whom I'm happy to say are in these rooms now. But also, you know, when that didn't work, I drank alone, and that's where I ended up. I was a sort of a lone drinker. I was an isolated, lone, private drinker, and you know, that was what my life had become, and it just had got worse and worse. So that was kind of the alcohol consumption. But the consumption was nothing really compared to the fact that inside myself, I seemed to be becoming more and more crippled with anxiety. As my life went on, I got really more and more crippled. On the outside, I looked better and better, so to speak, in that I was promoted to different jobs. I was advising bishops, and I was really somebody, you know. And it was all terribly comical. I mean, I won't go into the combination of alcohol and advice that I gave sometimes, but suffice to say it was colourful and certainly not acted upon most of the time, thank God. But it was all very mad, and that was my life. It was just very kind of quietly mad and respectfully mad and politely mad, you know, but it was mad. And what I couldn't stick was inside myself anymore. The terrible chaos I felt every day. I didn't know anymore what it was like to get up and to shave and to shower and to have a normal day without a crazy, crazy, crazy head. And I remember one memory I had in the place where I was living. There was some workman in doing a job, and he was asking me about something in the morning that I was supposed to know about. It was windows or something about it. But I remember thinking, for some reason I had that kind of moment of clarity looking at this man working at whatever it was, 7:30 in the morning, and how clear he seemed and how sort of energetic he seemed when I was really wrecked and my head was in bits, you know. And he was perhaps about my age, and I remember thinking, how did he do that? I mean, it didn't occur to me that it was a Tuesday morning or a Wednesday morning. It's not like it was a weekend or anything. But you know, I couldn't seem to connect with other people in the normalcy of like drinking, not drinking. I just drank all the time whenever I got a chance. And as time went on, you know, that was the disease for me. It was a real disease of isolation. So I put on my game face and I did my best and I combed my hair and I wore aftershave and everyone said, "Isn't he lovely?" And it was terrible. It was awful. And there was that terrible secrecy about it, that secret drinker, you know. There's a joke in Ireland that all secret drinkers are women or priests. So it's a curious kind of statement about the future for women priests now, given that there's a new pope. But anyway, what I was going to say was there was that terrible isolation and terrible lack of connection with life, I think, that I didn't even recognise then. Because I think part of the disease for me was that, like I guess for all of us, the chaos was such that I wasn't really able to see how bad I was. That's how the denial was. I wasn't able to see how sick I was. And I was really very ill. And I thought that, you know, I was like someone who was living in a house with all the shades pulled down and an inch of light coming in, and I thought it was daytime. You know, there was that kind of, I thought it was a bright place to live, but in fact I was living in the basement of a wonderful house. You know, it was just an awful kind of terrible, nightmarish kind of existence while I smiled my way through the gloom. And that was life for me. And that isolation sort of had to change. And it did change because in 1995 an intervention was made about my drinking, and the boss man came from Dublin to see me and said, "I hear you're hitting the bottle." And I said, "I'm not hitting the bottle, I'm an alcoholic." It's an extraordinary thing to say, really. He said, "This was easy." He said, "I expected this to take an hour or two. It was only 10 minutes." And so we immediately talked about treatment and different things. And I was too threatened to go to treatment at the time. I went to AA. I went to see my brother, who lived and still does in the west of Ireland. And he was in the fellowship, and he took me to AA. And I have the blessing of, from the first day I went to AA, I never drank again. I had all my relapses before I came to AA. And, you know, that feeling, when I came to AA, that feeling of recovered simplicity was something that was amazing for me, because when I was drinking, nothing was ever enough. I was always eternally dissatisfied. I was always fed up, and I was always looking for something else. Not this, something else. So whatever it is, it's not here. That was my thinking. I couldn't stay in the moment or in the place I found myself. And that was the terrible kind of gnawing sameness of every day for me. I was just unhappy. But when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I kind of relearned over time, just as alcoholism had creeped up in my life, so too did sobriety creep up by going to the meetings and by doing what was suggested. And as time went on, I learned to appreciate small things, and I learned to be satisfied and content with things. And that word content was not part of my vocabulary when I was drinking. So I went from someone who was isolated to being someone who was kind of connected, even within a fellowship, even having that possibility of connection if I wanted to, because in my early days I collected lots of phone numbers, and I got lots of contacts that way. A lot of whom I didn't use, but nonetheless they were like a sort of a safety net for me. That's what kind of kept me going. So as time went on, I learned about connection, and I learned about somehow getting content with what you have. The first meeting I went to, the only thing I remember really was the fella said, "Pray to want for what you have." And I remember thinking that was very odd, but it stayed with me because it took me a while to discern its meaning. I knew the meaning of a lot of things in my head, but I hadn't an experiential meaning of life at all. So as time went on, this feeling of growing and change came into my life. I didn't call it that, but for me that the program was very much about change. What kind of person did I want to be in the world? And it was as a result of that I ended up leaving the community and leaving it all behind me and moving to another place and another country and getting a relationship and figuring out stuff. And that kind of life was such that it was so kind of typical of the alcoholic that's me. It looked great, but it felt shit. And it sounded wonderful, but it was really tragic. And the tragedy of my drinking, my active drinking, was that I came to kind of accept the unacceptable. I came to sort of somehow tolerate what was intolerable. I came to somehow put up with things that no human being need put up with. But it was all self-inflicted with this terrible disease that we share. So that movement, that change kept happening. And the one grace I had, I suppose, was that I was open to change. When I came to my first meeting, I thought whatever happens in my life has got to be better than what's been happening today. Whatever the hell happens, it's got to be better than what's been there. That was all I knew. I knew that whatever was going to happen had to be better, because it couldn't have got worse. Well, I guess it could have, I've heard here, but that's how it felt to me. So coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, somehow that willingness to change, I was willing to do anything I was told, and I did. I called people, I got a sponsor, I did the steps, I just did everything without any question. And that was amazing for me, just to be able to kind of, not learn anymore from my head, because my brain was full of stuff. But learn in another way about life. Learn life by living it. Living into recovery rather than getting a formula, which doesn't work, as we know. It's the people who understand it best are the least good at it often. So there's something very mysterious about recovery. This shift for me from being dissatisfied to being someone who was content, someone who was isolated to being a man who was more connected. And also, I suppose, one of the reasons I was in a monastery was that I think I was trying to be good. I was trying to be a good man or a good person. That's what I valued in life and still do. But I gave up being good, as I've often shared. I stopped that target altogether. So being good is very overrated. I can tell you. I spent years on it. But being real is what I kind of look for now. How can I come to be a real human being? That's the challenge. Can I learn to be really myself, whatever that is? Can I learn to really be in the world with all of the pluses and with all of the minuses that make up my character? And can I stop this moral obligation to get better and improve? What if I was to discover more about life? What if that was to be a goal? Growing and expanding and learning and being willing to change. That's all. It's nothing got to do with being good. That's for me. Because what I discovered in Alcoholics Anonymous was that maybe I was good enough and I just had to be myself. That was the movement, not about being bad and then becoming good, which was my whole kind of Catholic upbringing. So that these shifts all occurred, and they were really, really amazing. This constant shift. And through working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I did learn that, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I did learn that I could be friends with my past and that I could forgive myself for being the asshole that I was when I drank and doing the stuff I did. A lot of it to myself as well as to other people. I could somehow learn to forgive myself for that, because I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous and through having sponsors and working the steps that I also had to look at my intentions in life. I was a decent man with pretty good intentions. I just had screwed it all up because I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that my family history is riddled with alcoholism. No one told me until I got into the fellowship. Maybe they did, I didn't remember. But the reality was, I didn't know this stuff. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it. I've been trained in counselling and psychology and the devil knows what. But I thought, that alcoholism was someone else's disease. I didn't know, for example, it's the first drink that makes you drunk. I didn't know that, you have to do it just for today. I didn't know that you could just live now, not with so much stuff in my head, because it's not there now, it's only in my head. I didn't know, to be sort of succinct, I didn't know I was mad. Now I know I'm mad, so it's not a problem anymore, because my mind is an alcoholic mind, and it's mad. The joy of it is that I've never been sinner because I recognize the madness. So naming and taming the madness was really important for me. And it's not that I've changed in that cerebral way, it's because I've changed in my approach to life. It's become like a spiritual experience, as they would say. So these changes and that not regretting the past has been replaced by some kind of acceptance. Some kind of acceptance. And today my life works. It's a good enough life. That's the difference. My wants will never be met, but my needs are always met. But the disease tells me there's never enough. The disease tells me there's always a problem. That's the madness I'm talking about. And the disease constantly keeps me anxious. I suffer quite a bit with anxiety. And, part of that is that, I have this head that tells me, it's very active, so it tells me a lot of stuff, most of which is not true. My head is really good for adding up figures and for remembering phone numbers, but it's no good for telling me anything about life. My brain is no good for doing that. I come to these rooms to learn that. I learn that from a different place, not from my head. Because you don't want to hear my advice like the bishop. I don't want to be given advice like that. I'm telling people to fuck off. It's hardly solutions, Jeez. But that was the best I knew, God, it's dreadful. But now I know I don't have to be so smart or clever. I just have to live and share my experience, share my anxiety, share what I'm working on. I'm working again through the steps with my sponsor. And being able to work through stuff, being able to talk to someone else, reminds me that the madness in my head is only just that. So on a daily basis, I have learned that change is really key. This program is really all about change. For me, it has been all about change. Am I willing to change? Yes, I am. I'm still willing to change. I can't describe how my life is so different now than it was 20 years ago. Almost everything about it is different. Almost everything about it. Well, not almost. Everything about it is different. But that's because I am open to change. I never thought I'd be living in Australia. I never planned this. But there it is. It's almost like it happens by accident. Life kind of happens by accident when I'm busy planning how it should be. And that's been wonderful. That discovery that I can somehow live a day at a time, doing the best I can. And that's good enough. That it's good enough a day at a time, whatever you've done today. Because we do the best with the lights we've got. We make the best decisions with what we have. And that's how my life has been. So today, it's not that I have a perfect life, but I have a life in which things are possible in a way they never were when I drank. And that's all been due to the program and to coming here and sharing with people like yourselves. Thanks very much.